Hello and welcome to another wilderness tamed gardening video, and as the title suggests, this one is all about hedges. And how in the UK particularly most people aren't that good at maintaining their hedges correctly. So we'll be looking at maintenance, different styles of hedges and different plants that can be used in growing. You could try your hand at old style parterre gardens. Some hedges are just completely neglected and turned into a row of trees. Some become completely ruined but are still managed, but possibly not very well. But they do look magnificent. So this one, and as you see, if you look to the sort of far left in the distance of this hedge, how much it's leaning over the path. And that's because the majority of people in the UK allow their hedges to belly out and become V-shaped or U-shaped, so that they're thicker at the top than they are at the bottom, and that's completely the opposite way around. They're supposed to be A-shaped, a bit like a dry stone wall. If you've ever looked at a wall on end in a farm boundary, they're generally A-shaped. So we're going to tackle this fella. It's a bit straggly looking, hasn't been cut for about a year. It's got, as you can see, roses growing out of it, and there's an elder in the corner. Just a bit of a mess. But after a couple of hours and being fairly ruthless, we've taken it down to a manageable height, cut into the top of it and each side, and as you can see, it tapers in gradually at the top and it's A-framed. Now that was privet. This is a conifer hedge. A lot of people moan and groan about Leylandii conifers in particular, and how they can be unmanageable and just look a bit tatty. But if you treat them well and maintain them regularly, so a couple of cuts a year, that's all it takes, you can form a really neat formal hedge. Now I'm not big on formal or Leylandii conifers to be honest, but that is a nice smart hedge. Okay, now we're going to go live. And you'll recognize the next few video clips from a previous video I did on hedges to veggies. And this is my own front garden privet hedge here. So that's the style of digging straight into the face of the hedge, clipping it away and creating a lot of waste, a lot of bulky long stems to try and either bag up or get rid of. The system I prefer to use is feathering in from the tips of the stems and working my way gradually and cutting them into little chunks in towards the face of the hedge. Now it does make the cutting part of the job a little bit longer, but the end result is those cut bits of hedge are usable and much easier to gather up and create a lot less bulk. So it's just a gradual case of working your way from the outer tips of the shoots, inch by inch, into the face of the hedge. You can make it much neater, and there's less risk of digging in too far straight away and gouging out a chunk of the hedge, revealing a load of bare twigs and creating a bald spot. Now, speaking of bald spots, there is a bald spot in the bottom left of the hedge there, which I'm working my way towards. That was the result of having a bag full of logs up against the hedge for about a year. But, you know, it's no big deal. There's bigger things in life to worry about than a bald spot on a hedge, to be honest. So we're nearly done. And my neighbours and I share the cutting of this hedge, so I do my side and as much of the top as I can safely reach, and they do their half. It's a little bit wider at the top than it should be, ideally, but you know, it's manageable. It's easily manageable. So now, whoa, that's loud. Oh, that's better. So I'm standing on a firm stool in order to trim the top of the bush. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. And it's important that you use a secure platform of some kind if you need to access a high hedge, because the last thing you want to do is fall face first into your hedge, especially if the hedge cutter itself is between you and the hedge. That's not a good shave. So I'm just working my way along, shuffling my stool, and still tapering in at the top there, little bits at a time, making as neat a job as I can. Now this hedge gets cut, like all the hedges that I maintain, either side of the bird nesting season. As a responsible conservation gardener, wildlife friendly in every aspect, I will not cut hedges between March and August because it's actually illegal to deliberately disturb nesting birds. So I just won't do it. If I was specifically asked to, I would do a nesting bird survey beforehand in order to establish that the hedge was unoccupied. Otherwise, just won't entertain it. So there you go, bit of responsible hedge maintenance there. So this is the first lot of stuff that I cut, all the long bits. It's a lot of bulk to get rid of and just difficult to shift essentially. All the little bits neatly cut up on the path there, and the path, as I mentioned previously, is important for access and ease of maintenance. So here's a bit of shameless product placement. I'm using my steel leaf sucker upperer, and that is its official name. It's on the box and everything. Oh, excuse me, just shake my sack. So the fan in the machine that creates the vacuum that sucks all the leaves and twigs up through that big black tube is bladed. So what it's doing is as everything passes through it or over it, it's chopping it up even smaller. So the way I cut the hedge, that sort of feathering in, cuts everything into small bits, and then sucking it up like this, there's obviously a bit of a blockage in my sack, cutting it up like this even more with the vacuum. So the end result, as you will have realised, is a nice mulch of chopped plant matter which will go on the compost. I really need to sort that sack out. Sorry, hang on, I'll be back. So hopefully you'll see the reason for having a path alongside a hedge. Concrete, tarmac, paving stones like mine, even well-maintained grass path that's kept cut short, it makes it so much more easier to gather up the bits once they've been cut, to get to the hedge in the first place. Having a bed or a border full of precious plants right up against your hedge is an absolute nightmare from a maintenance point of view. You're going to be trampling all over that stuff. So put a path down. It doesn't have to be wide. I mean, mine's sort of less than half a metre wide, and it just makes your life so much easier. If you're designing a garden from scratch or modifying a garden, existing one, if you've got a hedge, put a path alongside it. Honestly, it's the best thing ever. And as you can see, it hasn't taken me long. I mean, I know I've speeded this bit up, but it doesn't take me long to get along, and I've reduced all of the stuff that I've cut off the hedge into that one bag. So there you go, nicely cleaned and easy to look after. What could be better? So I've emptied my sack into the wheelbarrow, and there you are, lots of nice finely chopped privet hedge. So as I've mentioned, it's a soft-leaved semi-evergreen. There's a popular evergreen hedge, but it makes a lot of work for you, and it's Laurel. Now, the good things about Laurel are it's strong growing, fast growing, nice big exotic green leaves, excellent flowers, nectar rich for pollinating insects, and that's about it. All evergreen plants, the leaves have a limited lifespan, so they are constantly dropping all year round. And if you've got a hedge this size, it's going to be producing a lot of dead leaves all throughout the year, not just in the autumn, like a deciduous hedge drops all its leaves all in one go. Big evergreen hedge is constantly shedding leaves, and it's a right pain in the neck. Now then, The other downside with laurel is when you're cutting it like this, it's releasing cyanide. Okay, in the leaves and the stems, it has chemicals that, when the plant is under threat, releases it as cyanide. So you've got to stop every so often, stand away from the plant, and take a few breaths of fresh air. Otherwise, you'll go unconscious. You'll become aware of a sweet smell, almost like almonds, and that could be the last thing you ever smell. So deciduous hedges are well worth considering for the mix of plants you can choose. And the two seasons to think about conquering first are autumn and winter. Good autumn leaf colour, and then through the winter a continuation of berry colour, interesting stem colour, and nice bud colour as well in some plants. Okay, spring and summer are a doddle. You can easily cover those with interest, but autumn and winter can provide a lot of interest as well. Another alternative to a narrow formal hedge or informal hedge is a shelter belt of trees which can be several meters deep. And this is great as a windbreak to protect the more delicate plants in your garden, a sound buffer for traffic or a train line, or to disguise a view of some ugly buildings or whatever. And these shelter belts create a completely new environment in your garden if you've got the space as well. You can introduce all kinds of different plants in there. You don't manage the trees as often, but you do need to keep an eye on them from a safety point of view. If they overhang public roads, paths, or your neighbours' gardens, if you get fungi in the roots of your trees, it suggests there's a problem, and they'll start to drop leaves and branches from the crown, and they can become a hazard. So you do need to maintain trees in a shelter belt from a safety point of view as much as anything. I just thought I'd chuck in some really nice pictures of mushrooms and toadstools because they're always interesting. So the insects and flowers you can introduce create a whole new environment in the garden if you get a good mix of fruiting trees, blossoms. You can provide pollination for insects like this buff-tailed bee, for example. Butterflies and moths will come and frequent the glades in your shelter belt. All kinds of interesting invertebrates, small amphibians, reptiles, small mammals. They'll all use the hedge as a corridor or a place to forage for food. And of course, not forgetting the birds which will come and feed and possibly nest in the hedge as well. You can underplant with a multitude of interesting spring flowers for a bit of early colour like bulbs, snowdrops, anemones, bluebells. Hedgerows themselves offer up an opportunity to establish some nice interesting plants for summer colour, hedge woundwort, even growing things up through the hedge to add a bit of interest in the summer as well. How about doing something funky with the structure of the hedge itself? This is a willow hedge that a friend of mine in Germany has outside their house. And as the willow grows, they just weave the branches in and out of each other. That's a phenomenal looking thing, and it's an excellent habitat for birds to nest in and other animals to shelter in. This is a pleached beech hedge, and it's an idea I stole from the Basque country, where they weave the branches of the plane trees above the footpaths along their streets to form a canopy. And basically I'm taking the branches from neighbouring trees and weaving them in to one another, sort of spiralling or plaiting them in together. And eventually as they grow, they'll swell, rub against each other, thicken up and form a solid branch, sort of two become one. And this forms a really good strong framework. Now if we look back along the length of the hedge, we'll see it's about, I don't know, I'm guessing about 40 meters plus in length. And pleached trees, pleached hedges are sort of bare at the stem, the base of the stem, and then the foliage and branches occur about halfway up or more. We've allowed the hedge to get about 2 foot above the height of the fence. See, these are just young trees and they're held in place. That's just little lengths of rubber hosing tacked into the fence. They'll be removed once the hedge is mature. So here's a close-up. You can see they're just spiraled around one another, and as I say, once they mature they'll form a really solid barrier, really solid. Probably last longer, well, they will last longer than the fence obviously, as the trees will live for hundreds of years. So I've got my chopper and my billocks out here to start some hedge laying. I am driving a pole into the beaver of the hedge, and it's something that's not done really in the northeast of England. I'm just weaving in the benders, bonking the benders down on the top of the hedge to keep them nice and tight. And the end result will be a stock-proof fence that will keep all the sheep and cattle in that little paddock there. Again, in the northeast of England there's not really a good tradition of hedge laying, but there should be. So hopefully from this you've gained a better understanding of hedge design, hedge management, and the types of plants you can put into a hedge mix. It doesn't have to be all one plant. A mix of different things can make it much more interesting. Thing I forgot to mention about the importance of establishing an A-shaped hedge is, if you're in an area where you're prone to a lot of heavy snow, a top-heavy hedge with a weight of snow on the top is just going to burst open, which is not ideal. So that A shape with a flat, narrow top and plenty of support and taper from the base is going to weatherproof the hedge. Snow is just going to sit on it, fall off the sides, and not damage the hedge. The only thing that might damage the hedge is a tornado or a hurricane ripping chunks out of it. In the northeast of England, we're not big on hurricanes and tornadoes, I've got to be honest. Can't remember the last one we had, really. The bird nesting season thing is something to think about when you're wanting to cut the hedge. If you want to cut the hedge in the middle of the summer, fine, but just have a check through the hedge first. Just watch it for a couple of hours one day with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and see if there's any regular bird activity coming in and out, feeding chicks, or the father feeding the mother as she's sitting on the nest, and all this sort of thing. And go through and have a peer into the hedge. I think one thing sort of twitcher type people do is they go along with a little stick and they just tap the hedge lightly to see if there's any reaction from chicks or parent birds. Think about all the insects you're providing a habitat for, and small mammals, amphibians and reptiles and all that sort of thing. You're creating a great habitat. Hedges are fantastic, and they can be as high or as low maintenance as you want them to be. If you choose the right plants for the area you live in, and to create what you want from the hedge, which can either just be a little bit of a boundary between you and the neighbours, or to divide out part of the garden into separate sort of areas. Time for bed. Then that's great. And as I say, it might be like the shelter belt, something tall to block a view from a neighbour's window, or an ugly view of a house, or a billboard with a picture of Donald Trump on, something like that, you know. Nobody needs to see that. So yeah, hedges are great, and if they're well maintained and well looked after, they'll last you and several generations a lifetime, and they're really important from a habitat point of view for wildlife, which of course that's what Wilderness Tamed is all about. I hope you've enjoyed this little episode, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Happy gardening and all of that.